The church smelled like expensive flowers and old money. Every pew was filled with people who knew better than to speak. Without permission, men in tailored suits sat rigid, their eyes forward, their hands resting carefully on their knees. Women in silk and pearls dabbed at nothing with pressed handkerchiefs. No one fidgeted. No one whispered. This was a Ferrante event, and at a Ferrante event, you behaved. Luca Ferrante stood at the altar like he owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. He was 34, dark-haired, with a jaw that looked carved from something harder than bone. He wore his suit the way other men wore armor. His eyes were a flat, cold gray, the kind that gave nothing away and took everything in. He had built the Ferrante Empire on two things: patience and a complete absence of mercy for those who wasted his time. Today, someone was wasting his time. The Thorn-Ferrante arrangement had been his father's dying wish. A peace treaty stitched together between two families who had spent a decade bleeding each other dry. The Thorns controlled Eastern European supply routes. The Ferrantes controlled distribution across Western Europe and parts of North Africa. Together, they were untouchable. Divided, they were expensive. Luca understood the logic. He even respected it. In the cold, clinical way, he respected most things. What he did not respect was being handed a bride like a contract clause. He stood at that altar, and he waited, and he told himself it would be brief. A ceremony, a signature, a woman who would live in the East Wing, attend the occasional dinner, and otherwise stay invisible. He had requirements for a wife: discretion, presentation, and silence. Simple things, reasonable things. The doors at the back of the church opened. Luca turned, and then, for the first time in 11 years, Luca Ferrante laughed in public. It started as a breath, a sharp exhale through his nose. Then it became a sound, low, short, but unmistakably genuine. The kind of laugh a man makes when reality insults his intelligence so directly that disbelief is the only honest response. She walked down the aisle in flat boots caked with dried mud along the soles. Her dress was a correct dress, white-fitted, selected no doubt by someone who'd been given instructions, but she wore it the way a soldier wears a costume. Her hair was cut close to her head, a dark, no-nonsense crop that framed a face completely bare of makeup. No rouge, no lipstick, no powder, just a sharp jaw, dark brows, and a pair of eyes the color of pine resin that scanned the room with a flat assessment of someone counting exits. She wasn't nervous. That was the first thing Luca registered past the shock of her appearance. Every bride he had ever seen in that church, and there had been several, none his own, had trembled in some way. A shaking bouquet, a bitten lip, a smile stretched too wide to be natural. Fear dressed up as joy. It was a standard. This woman walked like she was arriving in negotiation she had already prepared for. She reached the altar. She looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at a weather forecast. Useful information, no emotional investment. Luca's laugh faded. He studied her face for a flicker of reaction to his laughter. There was none, not anger, not humiliation, not the desperate scramble to compose herself that he expected. Nothing, just those pine resin eyes, level and unbothered, holding his gaze without blinking. Something shifted very quietly at the base of his spine. He ignored it. The priest began. The words moved through the air like smoke. Ceremonial, old, practically meaningless in a room where half the congregation carried licensed firearms, and the other half didn't bother with licenses. Luca repeated what he was told to repeat. The woman, Mia Thorne, her name was Mia Thorne, he had read it on a document, repeated her own words in a voice that was low and even and entirely without tremor. When the priest reached the kiss, Luca turned to her. She looked at him. 1 beat. 2. Then she turned to the priest and said, quietly but clearly, "We'll skip that part." A ripple moved through the pews. Luca heard it. The sharp intake of breath from several directions, the shift of expensive fabric, the loaded silence of men who knew better than to react but couldn't quite suppress the instinct. He should have been furious. He noted, with some private irritation, that he was not. He was something else. Something he didn't have a clean word for. The reception that followed was a masterpiece of performed civility. Luca moved through it like he always did. Unhurried, acknowledged by everyone, approachable by no one who valued their position. He shook hands. He accepted congratulations with a nod that said thank you and you are replaceable in the same motion. He did not look for his wife. Near the end of the evening, Enzo appeared at his shoulder. Enzo had been at Luca's right hand for 9 years, a quiet man with observant eyes and the good sense never to offer opinions unless asked. She's been speaking to your security team for the last 40 minutes, Enzo said, asking about the perimeter rotation schedule. Luca turned slowly. Across the room, Mia Ferrante, legally as of 2 hours ago, stood with 3 of his men, her arms crossed, her head slightly tilted, listening to something one of them was explaining. His men, he noticed, were standing differently than they usually did, less at ease, more attentive, the posture of people who have realized, unexpectedly, that the person they're talking to is worth listening to. Luca watched her for a long moment. Then he turned back to Enzo. "She'll be gone within a week," he said. From across the room, Mia turned her head not toward him, just in his general direction, adjusting her view of something. But for half a second, the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, smaller than that. The private expression of someone who has already heard what you said and already knows you are wrong. She was in the gym at 5 in the morning. Luca knew this because Rico, who ran the estate security rotation, mentioned it in passing during the morning briefing, not as a complaint. More in the way a man mentions something that has genuinely surprised him and isn't sure how to categorize it. She asked about the weight rack. Rico said, "I told her it was for staff use." She said, "Good, I'm staff." And then she used it. Luca said nothing. He moved on to the next item on the briefing agenda. But that evening, when the house was quiet and the last of the day staff had gone home, he walked past the gym on the east corridor and paused at the door. Through the narrow window, he could see her, working through a series of compound lifts with the unhurried focus of someone for whom this was not exercise, but maintenance. She moved through the weights like she was servicing a machine she relied on. No music, no mirror watching, just the work. He did not go in. He walked away. By the third day, 2 of his bodyguards, Saul and Dimitri, both former military, both men Luca had hired specifically because they were difficult to impress, had stopped pointedly ignoring her. By the 5th day, Saul had apparently spotted her correcting a wiring fault in the secondary camera relay near the east gate, a fault that the estate's contracted security firm had missed on their last 3 inspections. He told Dimitri. Dimitri told Rico. Rico told Enzo. Enzo told Luca over coffee and said nothing else, which was Enzo's way of saying quite a lot. She touched the security system? Luca said, "Fix it." Enzo said. The relay had been cycling on a 4-second delay. She closed it to half a second. I had the tech team check her work. He paused. It was correct. Luca set down his coffee. She had no authorization to touch that system. No, Enzo agreed. He did not add anything. He didn't need to. That evening, Luca found her in the library. Not reading, as it turned out, but using the large table to spread out what appeared to be hand-drawn annotations over a printed floor plan of the estate. She didn't look up when he entered. "That's a restricted document," he said. It was in the 3rd drawer of the study desk. She said, still not looking up. If it was truly restricted, it wouldn't be in a room with no lock. She made a small notation with a pencil. "You have a blind spot on the north side terrace. 40-degree angle from the garden wall. No camera, no line of sight from the gate post. Someone patient could stand there for 6 hours, and no one would know." Silence. "I'm telling you," she added, finally looking up, "because it's your house and you should know. Not because I need anything from you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the floor plan, studied the notation, set it back down, and left. He did not thank her. She did not expect him to. The dinner happened on the 8th day. It was a semi-formal gathering, 8 of Luca's lieutenants and their partners, a routine monthly meal that served as much as a loyalty check as a social occasion. He had told Enzo to inform Mia that her attendance was expected, not requested, expected. She arrived on time. She wore dark trousers, a fitted black shirt, and the same flat boots, now clean. No jewelry except a thin scar along her left jawline that caught the candlelight in a way that made it look almost decorative. She sat where she was placed, at Luca's left, and she was quiet for the first part of the meal in a way that the men around the table seemed to interpret as shyness or deference. Luca knew by now that was neither. It was assessment. The trouble started when Carbone, who ran the Southernport operation and had a long history of saying things at dinner tables that he shouldn't, leaned across his partner and addressed me with the tone men like him use for women they had already decided were decoration. So, Carbone said, "What exactly does a Thorn girl know about how we do things here?" Every eye at the table slid toward Mia. Luca watched her. She set down her fork. She looked at Carbone with the same calm she had walked down the aisle with. "Enough," she said, "to know that your Southernport operation was audited by a government liaison 18 months ago, and the discrepancy in the shipping manifest for that quarter was covered using accounts registered to your mother-in-law's bakery in Palermo." She paused. "I also know that the liaison was paid off with a wire transfer trace through a shell company that your own underboss doesn't know exists, which means you've been skimming from Luca for at least 2 years." The table went very still. Carbone's face had turned the color of old ash. His partner's hand had frozen around her wine glass. 3 of the other men were now looking at Luca with the carefully controlled expressions of people calculating whether they were safe. Luca said nothing. He watched Mia pick up her fork and resume eating. Later, when the guests had gone and the house staff had cleared the tables, Luca found her in the corridor outside the dining room. He stepped in front of her path, and she stopped, looking up at him without alarm. "What are you?" he said. The question came out differently than he intended, less aggressive, almost genuine. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, simply, "Everything you underestimated." She walked past him. He let her go. The envelope arrived the next morning. Plain, no return address. Delivered to the estate's main gate addressed not to Luca Ferrante or the Ferrante household. Addressed to Mia Thorne. Enjoying the story? You're watching Nickel Eye Stories. Follow and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Drop a red heart if Mia already has your respect. The envelope contained a single photograph. It showed Mia from behind, walking through the estate's east garden. The shot was taken from outside the perimeter wall, from the exact blind spot she had marked on the floor plan 6 days earlier. The timestamp printed in the corner read 3 days ago, which meant someone had been watching before the envelope was sent, before the warning, before whatever came next. Luca looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at Mia, who was sitting across the desk from him, her face unreadable, her hands resting open on her knees. "Do you know who sent this?" he asked. "I have a suspicion," she said. "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, not hesitant. The distinction was important. This was the quiet of someone choosing how much of a truth to release at once. "It's a calling card," she said finally, "used by a specific network. Eastern European. Old-school tradecraft. The kind of people who still believe that delivering a message in person, even indirectly, is a form of respect. Who do you know in that network?" She looked at him, and in the second before she spoke, something moved across her face. Not fear. Something older than fear. The expression of a person confronting a thing they have spent years carrying in silence. "My mother," she said. Luca's analysts worked through the night. By morning, they had assembled what his lead researcher called, with unusual solemnity, the most suppressed file I have ever been asked to pull. Vera Thorne, born 1964, Eastern Europe. Criminal record stretching across 7 countries under 4 different names. Believed killed in a car bombing in 2009, a widely reported death, mourned by several governments for entirely opposite reasons. Not dead, operating, quietly, brilliantly, and without a single confirmed sighting in 16 years. Luca read the file at his desk, while Enzo stood by the window and said nothing. "She faked her own death," Luca said. "Yes. And then she arranged for her daughter to be placed inside my house." "Yes." Luca closed the file. This marriage was never a peace treaty. "It appears," Enzo said carefully, "that it was an insertion operation." The words sat in the air between them like something with teeth. Luca had been maneuvered, not clumsily, elegantly, patiently, across years of careful groundwork, by a woman the world believed was dead. He had been handed a bride and told it was diplomacy, and he had accepted it because the logic was sound, and because he had not, at any point, considered that the bride herself might be the point. He pulled Mia's background file next. He had done a cursory check before the wedding. Standard procedure. Name, age, lineage. What the file had shown him was a woman with a quiet history. Education in Switzerland. A few years in the private sector. Nothing remarkable. The full file looked nothing like that. Military training beginning at age 15. Accelerated and unconventional. 3 languages, Russian, Mandarin, Arabic, to professional fluency. 2 years working with a private intelligence contractor whose name appeared as own files under known associates. Adversarial. Field operations in 4 countries. All redacted. All flagged at a classification level that required Luca's most expensive contact to partially unredact. A woman who had been shaped, precisely and deliberately, into something that could walk through a door like a bride and function like an operative. She had never been just a bride. The attack came on the 3rd night after the envelope. It was well planned, for a point of entry, coordinated timing, the kind of assault that required inside knowledge of the state's patrol schedule. Luca's men responded fast, but the fastest response didn't come from his men. He was moving to the ground floor toward the east corridor when he heard it. 2 quick impacts, the specific flat sound of a close-quarters fight ending efficiently, and then silence. He came around the corner, with his weapon raised. Mia was standing in the corridor. 2 men were on the floor. She had a shallow cut across her forearm and the focused, settled breathing of someone returning from a state of high alert. She looked at the men on the floor, then at Luca, then at the gun in his hand. "East entrance is clear," she said. "I checked the service stairs. They'll have sent a 3rd. He checked the service stairs. There was a 3rd. When it was over, when his estate was secured and his men were accounting for the damage, Luca found her in the small room off the kitchen, the one with the first aid supplies, because of course she knew where it was, pressing a folded cloth to the cut on her arm. She was alone. She hadn't called anyone. She wasn't going to. He crossed the room. He took the cloth from her hand without asking. He held it against the cut with the correct pressure, and he did not say anything. She looked at him. He looked at the wound. "You didn't have to," she said. "I know," he said. They stayed like that for a moment, in the quiet after the storm, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her skin. Something between them had shifted, not softened. Neither of them was soft, but changed, the way the air changes after lightning. Everything the same, except charged. The days after the attack had a different texture. The estate was tighter. Patrols adjusted, entry points reinforced, the blind spot on the north terrace finally sealed. Luca spent long hours in his office reviewing the intelligence that the assault had shaken loose, who had sent them, who had funded them, what they had hoped to gain. These were the hours of the day he normally spent alone. Increasingly, he did not. Mia was useful in a way that the most dangerous things are useful, precisely, efficiently, and in ways you hadn't anticipated needing. She had a mind that moved in straight lines through complicated terrain. She didn't speculate. She mapped. She would sit across from him at the long table in the operations room with a cup of black coffee, going cold beside her, working through intelligence reports with the methodical attention of someone who had done this work before and knew its weight. He found himself waiting for the point when she would get something wrong. She didn't. He found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. He stopped pretending, after a while, that he wasn't doing it. There were small things. The way she folded her report closed when she was finished with it, always crisp, always precisely aligned. The way she stood at the window on the nights it rained, not watching the rain so much as standing the sound of it, like it was something she needed. The scar on her jaw that she never touched, never acknowledged, but that he had started to think about the origin of in the empty spaces of meetings that didn't require his full attention. On the 11th night after the attack, they were alone in the operations room at close to 1 in the morning. The work was done. Neither of them moved to leave. "Why did you agree to it?" he asked. The question had been sitting behind his teeth for 2 weeks. The marriage, if you knew what it was, if your mother planned it, you could have refused, or warned me. Mia looked at her coffee. She turned the cup slowly once, a small rotation. Thinking. "I have a younger brother," she said. 16. He doesn't know anything about our mother's world. She made sure of that, same as she made sure of me, just differently. He's in school in Lisbon. Quiet life, safe life." She paused. "My mother called in a favor to keep him that way. The favor was me. The room was quiet. She traded you," Luca said. "She protected him using the only currency she had." Mia looked up. "I'm not angry about it. I made peace with it. I just needed you to understand that I was never here to destroy you. I was here to survive this, and to make sure no one on either side got hurt by it unnecessarily." Luca looked at her for a long time. He thought about what it cost to say that, what it cost to carry it alone through a strange house, surrounded by men who worked for the person who, until recently, had openly dismissed you. "I laughed at you," he said. It came out flat, direct, the way he said most things, but the weight behind it was different. At the altar, I looked at you and I laughed. "Yes," she said without heat. "You did." "I laughed," he said, "because you walked in like you didn't need a single thing from that room, and I didn't know what to do with that." He paused. "I've spent a long time in rooms where people need things from me. It's the basis of every relationship I have. You walked in needing nothing, and it was the most unsettling thing I had seen in years." She looked at him steadily. Something behind her eyes was shifting, the way a guarded thing shifts when it decides, by small degrees, to let someone a little closer. "That's a strange thing to be unsettled by," she said. "You're a strange thing to have in my house," he said. And it didn't come out as an insult. They both knew it. He leaned forward across the table, slowly. She didn't move back. The distance between them shrank to something that had a different kind of weight, the kind that asks a question. Her eyes moved briefly to his mouth. His jaw tightened. His phone rang. He pulled back. He looked at the screen. The name on it made his blood cool by several degrees. It was a name he trusted, had trusted for years. The caller was Carbone. Enzo appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, and from the look on his face, he already knew. The intelligence brief was fast and brutal. Someone had been feeding the rival faction information for months. Patrol schedules, entry point layouts, the location of Luca's second safe house. Information that could only come from inside. The trail led to one place. Carbone. Luca stood very still for a moment. Carbone, who had sat at his table for 7 years. Carbone, who had been in the room when Luca made decisions. Carbone, who had dined with him the night Mia had exposed him with information that, he now understood, had been less an attack and more a warning. He turned to look at Mia. She met his eyes without surprise. "You knew," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a quiet, leveled acknowledgement of a man arriving somewhere he should have arrived sooner. "I suspected," she said. "After the dinner, I was certain. And you didn't tell me. I needed to confirm. And I needed you to be ready to hear it. Those are not always the same moment." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you now. This is Nikolai's stories. If this chapter hit different, share it with someone who loves a strong female lead. Chapter 5 is where everything breaks open. Don't miss it." Carbone confessed quickly. He had the look of a man who had spent months building a double life and had always, underneath it, known exactly how it would end. Luca sat across from him in the basement room that had heard confessions before and would hear them again. Mia stood to Luca's left, not behind him, not at a respectful distance. Beside him, she did not speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was its own form of testimony, proof that the information she provided was accurate, that her read of the situation had been correct from the beginning, that the woman Luca had laughed at on an altar 3 weeks ago had been seeing clearly every moment since. Carbone was handled, quietly, decisively, without drama. It was over by morning. The call came at 10 o'clock. Luca was in his office when Enzo knocked once and entered with the expression he reserved for situations that required Luca to be sitting down before he heard them. "There's a car at the front gate," Enzo said. "Armored, 3-vehicle convoy, Eastern European plates." A pause. "The lead car is registered to a shell company we've identified before." In the file, he placed a single piece of paper on the desk. Vera Thorne's network. Luca looked at the paper for a moment. Then he said, "Let them in." Vera Thorne was 60 years old and looked like someone had tried to make her into a weapon and had, in the end, succeeded completely. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a gray coat that was expensive enough to be subtle, and she moved through the entrance hall of the Ferrante estate with the ease of a woman who was used to walking into places that belonged to other people. She had been dead for 16 years. She looked, Luca thought, extremely alive. She looked at him, and then she looked past him, and her expression, for the first time, changed. Mia was standing at the top of the main staircase. Mother and daughter looked at each other across the space of the entrance hall. It was not the reunion of two people who had been separated by a distance. It was a reunion of two people who had been separated by a plan. One who had designed it, and one who had survived it. "The operation is complete," Vera said, addressing her daughter. Her voice was low, accented, precise. "The Ferrante network is mapped. The Alliance intelligence has been confirmed. You can come home now." The entrance hall was very quiet. Luca's men lined the walls. Vera's men stood at the door. Everyone in the room understood that whatever happened next would set the terms of something larger than this moment. Mia came down the stairs slowly. She stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at her mother with an expression. Luca was learning to read. The external stillness that meant the most important things were happening underneath. "I'm not leaving," Mia said. Vera's expression shifted. A small compression of the mouth, a recalibration. "This was never meant to be permanent. You completed what you were sent to do." "I completed what you sent me to do," Mia said. "That's different from what I'm choosing to do now." She descended the last 3 steps. "I'm not leaving. Not because of him. Not because of the Alliance or the territory or the intelligence value of my position. I'm staying because I choose to. Because for the first time in my life, I am somewhere that I chose with my own judgment, not yours." Vera looked at her for a long moment. The look had edges in it. Not cruelty, but the particular pain of a powerful person encountering a limit to their power that they love too much to push past. "Mia, you kept me safe," Mia said. "It was not an accusation. It was an accounting. You trained me. You protected Tomas. You made every decision you believed was right, and most of them were. But I am not a piece you move. I never agreed to be. I went along with this because of Tomas, and because I trusted that I could handle whatever I found here." She paused. "I was right. I handled it. And now I'm making a different choice." She looked at Luca. He was already looking at her. He crossed the entrance hall in several unhurried strides and came to stand beside her, close, deliberate, facing the room, facing Vera and her men and his own men. And the weight of everything the two of them had arrived at through fire and suspicion, and a photograph delivered to a gate. He spoke, and his voice carried the way it always did, without needing to be raised. "Mia Ferrante is not a placement. She is not an operative, and she is not a treaty clause." He let that settle. "She is the person I would most trust in this room, in any room. That is not a small thing in my world. It is, in fact, the largest thing I have." He paused. She stays with my respect, and on her terms. If anyone in this hall, on either side of this arrangement, has a problem with that, they are welcome to bring it to me directly." No one moved. Vera Thorne looked at her daughter for a long, waited moment. Something passed between them, old and complicated, and ultimately unresolvable in a single morning. Then Vera inclined her head. Not a surrender, an acknowledgement. "You have your mother's instincts," she said quietly to Mia. "I have better information than my mother had," Mia replied. The convoy left an hour later. When the last car had passed through the gate, the house exhaled. Staff dispersed. Enzo disappeared tactfully. The entrance hall emptied until it held only the two of them, standing in the winter light coming to the tall windows, the dust still settling from everything that had shifted. "You didn't have to do that," Mia said. "Stand with me?" "I know," Luca said. "I had it handled." "You always have it handled." He looked at her. "I wanted to stand there." "That's different." She studied him for a moment. The pine resin eyes that had held his gaze on an altar without blinking, that had assessed a security flaw and cataloged his men's crimes, and stood in the corridor of a firefight, like someone who simply could not be undone. She looked at him the way she looked at everything. Carefully, without illusion, taking it for exactly what it was. He said, "I'm sorry I laughed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't apologize. Just never do it again." Never, he said, and meant it. It was not a grand gesture. There was no dramatic declaration, no sweeping romantic gesture built for an audience. It was two people in a quiet hall, having arrived at the same place through entirely different roads, choosing, both of them clearly, with full information, to stay. The Mafia world is not known for its poets or its storytellers. News travels through it in whispers and in ledgers, and in particular silence that falls after a decision is made. And so the story of Luca Ferrante and Mia Thorne traveled the way those stories do, in pieces, imprecise, accumulated over months into something that the people who moved through that world would repeat to each other with a specific tone. They said, "The Ferrante boss married a Thorne girl, laughed at her at the altar, and then, with the pause that good stories require, regretted it within a month." What they meant was not that he regretted the marriage. What they meant, and what the people who heard it understood, was that he had been given the most dangerous and most valuable thing in his world, and had nearly dismissed it because it didn't look the way he expected. She had not made it easy for him. She would not, going forward, make things easy. That was not... Luca had concluded what he needed. He needed someone who saw the room clearly, who walked into difficult places without flinching, who told him the truth even when the truth was inconvenient, and who would stand beside him, not beside, when it mattered most. He had laughed at his bride. He would spend a long time making sure she knew he would not make that mistake again. Thank you for watching Nico Eye Stories. If you love Mia and Luca's journey, like and subscribe for more stories like this. Comment your favorite moment below, and share this with every story lover who deserves a story this good.